Hi, this is the Alt-Shift-X podcast, a show about stories. Today I interviewed C.M. Kösemen, the creator of All Tomorrows, a strange sci-fi story that we made an Alt-Shift-X video about. If you haven't seen the video, there's a link in the show notes. Kösemen originally published All Tomorrows online in 2006, using the pen name Nemo Ramjet. And ever since, All Tomorrows has floated around the internet as a mysterious and obscure PDF. Kösemen also writes books about history and architecture in his home country, Turkey, and he collaborates with paleontologists and other artists to write books about dinosaurs and cryptids. He creates surreal paintings and makes some fun YouTube vlogs. He's a fascinating artist, and we had a great conversation about his books, his art, his country, and online media. There are timestamps in the show notes if you'd like to skip around. Here's the interview.
I'll call you Alt-Shift, and you can call me CM Kösemen, or you can call me Memo, which is the M in CM is Memo, so there.
Cool.
And any of those many names floating around, they're fine by me.
Yeah, either that or Nemo Ramjet, right?
Yeah, actually, only that I don't use. I got kind of a adolescent thing. It kind of makes me cringe now. And I want to part my ways with it, but it keeps following me around.
Yeah, and it's funny with the All Tomorrows project, you know, sort of the one that you least expect, and sort of that old one from the back catalogue is the one that rears its head and becomes popular. It is weird how that happens. I've had similar experiences.
Sleeper hit. Boom.
Yeah, that's
Blast
right.
From the past.
You're in a hotel? Whereabouts are you?
Okay, so we are now we were on a holiday, and we coincidentally had our COVID shots. So for the past 2 days, we have been having some All Tomorrow style genetic rearrangement. I mean, the vaccine, I'm really thankful for it. I'm pro-vaccine all the way. But man, just take it easy during those few days.
Yeah.
I mean, in our case, it was a bit severe, maybe because we are in our mid-30s now. And we're through, and we feel better now that knowing that we're protected from this once-in-a-lifetime plague, I hope.
Yeah. Well, we pray that it's once in a lifetime, don't we?
Yeah.
So, C.M. Kösemen, you are the writer and the illustrator of All Tomorrows, and you're also an artist who makes surreal paintings. You've written and co-written books about paleontology and speculative zoology and history. You've written books about Turkish Jewish communities, preserving old tombstones and architecture in Turkey. You make YouTube vlogs exploring strange, abandoned urban spaces, and one video analyzing depictions of angels in the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's such a diverse creative output. You have so many different projects. So, I wonder, what are the common themes? What's the common thread here? What are the interests and the questions that are driving all these different creative works? What keeps you seeking something new?
Thank you, Alt-Shift. To begin with, I'd like to thank you and all your fans for having me and listening to me today, wherever you are in the world. And I think there's two common themes to everything I do. One, I want the things that I put out to be things that have never been seen before. I wouldn't like to go over and retread something that has been done before. And this is not just for originality's sake, but out of, I think, a respect for whoever I think will be reading it. I want them to read or see what I did and, at least go away with some thoughts. They could be as simple as, wow, cool creatures, or as complex as maybe this kind of historical community did not act this way or whatever. So something that has never been seen before, and something that just I would like to see. Whenever I see it, I film. And maybe a third common theme is, at least for the history work or the photography books that I produced. For those, it could be maybe a fight against entropy, because a lot of these books, my history books and visual history books, they kind of stand apart from the rest of the science fiction work. But in a way, they are a way to preserve something that's being lost through, basically, it all comes down to entropy. So it's a fight against entropy and the desire to show new worlds. Those two come together and motivate me. I get out of bed every morning, and I think that's what excites me.
Yeah, there's such a great sense of time in so much of what you do, because, yeah, you have your historical work, which is so much about preserving the past, at the same time that some of your other work is about imagining the future, looking both forwards and backwards, which is reflected in the titles of your All Tomorrows story, speculating about the future. But you also have your All Yesterdays book, which was a collaboration with some other guys about imagining dinosaurs in paleo art. So I wonder if you could speak on what that project was all about.
Yeah, for All Yesterdays, I think all the name credit has to go to John Conway, because when we were first working on this book, basically we were just hashing and bashing together some paleo art. And we had been noticing that, you don't have to make every dinosaur drawing something like a walking skeleton. So we'd been adding like fleshy bits, colorful bits, etc., etc. We'd been like building up this body of work. But then John said, when we were naming this project, we kind of agreed somewhere halfway through that this should be a book, and what should we call the book? And I had been suggesting names like Visions of the Past or something like that. And John was like, sorry, man, I know it's going to sound like a ripoff from All Tomorrows, but I want it to be All Yesterdays. And well, so did. So John did the majority of illustrations. I actually did the majority of the writing, and then some of the illustrations. And then it was like a neat little love child, because we'd been very close friends, and we were best men at each other's wedding. So there's like a kind of like bro thing there. Yeah. And then when the book was ready, Darren Naish, famous for his Cryptozoologicon blog and podcast, he also chipped in and agreed to write the introduction. So the choo-choo train was ready to go. And it came out, and I think it came out in like just the right time. I think there's a kind of time for books and movies to be appreciated. And for that book, it was the time, because the pace of scientific dinosaur discoveries was kind of reaching an asymptote, like once every 2 years we had a feathered fossil. Now we had like a new feathered fossil every 2 months or something. And then we were kind of getting hints in our minds that, there needs to be another turn in the tradition at which these animals are being reconstructed. So it kind of resonated with ideas many other people were having, and maybe because of that, a lot of people liked All Yesterdays. Still keeps paying part of my bills every month, and John's bills every month, so gotta be thankful for that. And yeah, it was one of my first serious books. A funny side note here, I had almost disowned All Tomorrows, because there are parts in it, even today, when I read it, it's a bit cringy. For example, the book's longer title is The Myriad Fortunes of Man. But why didn't I call it Humanity? Myriad Fortunes and blah, blah, blah of humanity. That there's an easy error that you could fix right away. So, and also the paintings, many people like them, and, thank you. But, to each artist, whether you write or draw or paint or sing, looking back, you see things you wish you could have fixed, and those had been beginning to like sting my eyes a bit. But, this work has had a life of its own as a PDF floating around the backwaters of the internet like a ghost ship. Yeah. On one hand, I was kind of like, this needs a rewrite. And then on the other hand, it has a life of its own. And I think the generation that I was born in 1984, so I think I am a very like proto-millennial or whatever. And then the generation right after mine really embraced this book. And maybe it's no coincidence that this popularity came at like exactly these couple of years because of the myriad disasters the world has been experiencing. There's a general theme of, let us not call it end days, but I mean, everyone feels like we are at the turn of some epoch, for the better or worse, we cannot tell, but, there's a sensation. I've been reading memoirs of Stefan Zweig, The World Before Yesterday, or The World of Yesterday. Now, he writes right before the outbreak of First World War. And there's a similar feeling in the air. I don't think like there's a war coming or blah, blah, anything like that. But we are definitely at the turn of an epoch in human history. And I mean, it leaves to be seen what kind of era it will be.
Yeah, maybe people are more receptive to stories about apocalypse and change in these weird times. And I do love that nature of the All Tomorrows book, the fact that it has been a PDF floating around on the internet without a clear home. Like one of the common links that people share All Tomorrows is like a speedrunning wiki, I think, is like one of the websites hosting this book that people are watching it on, and it's hilarious to me. And I think that sort of ephemerality and that sort of mysterious nature of the PDF really adds to its charm because it makes it feel like a real historical artifact that you've uncovered. I've heard you in interviews talking about an early memory of being a child in a sandpit and digging up a toy of a lizard in the ground and being entranced by this discovered object that you unearthed and being fascinated by it. And I think that's how I felt and how many people felt discovering All Tomorrows, because it's this mysterious object that you don't quite know what to make of it or where it's from. It's by this person, Nemo Ramjet. Who is Nemo Ramjet? Which is great. And All Tomorrows is written in this sort of... Yeah, I know. And it's written in this like archaeological style. It's written from the perspective of an alien creature 1 billion years in the future who is relating its interpretation of human history from that vantage point in the future.
The tone of voice is a high school student fanboying on The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. I mean, when you read it knowing that, it gets a new perspective. But do go on, then I'll give you a big, huge sandwich answer to all of these points you're nicely raising here. Yeah, well, it does have that vibe. But that's also reflected in the artwork, right? Because the artwork also, I mean, the story of All Tomorrows is great, but the artwork, I think, is what makes it, in my opinion. And part of the quality of this beautiful, grotesque artwork is the sort of archaeological, faded, textured, cracked and dusty visual effects that you've applied. So I wonder, like, how you physically achieved those effects. Like, was that done digitally? Was that done on like a physical canvas? How did you do that? Okay, so let me give you a big answer sandwich. Containing. Yeah, serve up a sandwich. I mean, to begin with, I think. So to begin with, you raise a very nice point about lore becoming a narrative form of its own. And I think it's when people look back at the literature of the present day, I think they will note that it's the emergence of a new narrative form. I think you get that a lot with Star Wars, Game of Thrones, or even things like Warhammer 40K. Do you know how to play Warhammer 40K? I don't. I mean, I watched videos of people trying to play it. It's like two guys rolling these dice and then moving these figures.
It looks like a lot of work.
Yeah. But then I I spent entire work days reading the lore of the Warhammer universe. And, you get lost in it. You kind of explore this labyrinth. And I think also the paper book, for example, is a great medium for the novel, because you turn the pages, you read it, and the information comes to you line by line by line by line. And then the online wiki is a new narrative form. As Marshall McLuhan says, the medium is the message. So with this medium, a new narrative form could be world building and just lore reading in itself. And I am one of those people. I'm sure there are many people like us around. You could just read the lore of some artwork, or it could be something like Game of Thrones, Star Wars, the world of Miyazaki's Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, the world of Evangelion, anything. Reading the lore is almost, and maybe dare I say, almost more important and more enjoyable than reading the narrative work itself.
Yeah.
So maybe there, I would be happy if in the future All Tomorrows could be seen as a footnote in that direction. I mean, the production of world building exercises and lore as standalone narrative artifacts of their own. So there's one. And then the visual tone of it. Okay, so that actually, to understand that better, we need to go back to the time between 2003 and 2006, where I produced this quote-unquote masterpiece. Basically, okay, I had read incomparable works by Olaf Stapledon. One of his works, Star Maker, it's about the future history of all planets and all universes. And then he has another work called First and Last Man, or Last and First Man, which is like the extreme future history of our species.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I was also reading on Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So I mean, that was fermenting in the pot. So actually, for a long time, I considered All Tomorrows just a pale, insignificant imitation of basically Gibbon and Olaf Stapledon. But then, I mean, in the very beginning, I was just reading these books and then coming up with strange post-human illustrations of my own. At this point, it was like, maybe I'll do a DeviantArt image gallery or something like that, So no book in existence then. And I began drawing these things. First thing I noticed when I started producing these artworks was that they look like racist caricatures. Like if I tried to give the post-humans a kind of a Caucasian look, it looked like a weird and disgusting David Bowie kind of thing. If I wanted to do them more like, I had an idea that in the future world's ethnic composition would be more homogeneous, so everyone would be kind of like Indian white or brown colored looking. But when I tried to do that with post-human creatures, they also look like horrible racist caricatures. So I was like, wait a minute, what am I going to do with this stuff?
Oh, is that why you added the color tints?
Yes, exactly. I was like, okay, let's lay this over with something else so it doesn't look like, because anyone with any drawing skills could try to draw a post-human creature and try to make it look like it has some ethnicity. Especially in this day and age, it's very, very difficult not to make it look like some sort of racist caricature. In fact, I think the other post-human book that's very popular, Man After Man by Dougal Dixon, he's also a very, very respected author. So sometimes people make memes out of his work. Like I've seen images out of Man After Man. It's cropped and used in nationalist groups to denote the other nationalist groups that they don't get along with, basically. So in order to avoid that cringe effect, I had to come up with this. And this was the year 2003-04. So I had to do some texturing. How am I going to do the textures? Especially in Istanbul. In Istanbul, I was living in Turkey. It's kind of like you don't get files like this. So I went out with a very primitive digital camera. Your telephones charging device probably takes better pictures at this day and age. I was just taking pictures of our concrete sidewalk, or like even things like in daily life. Like, remember the picture with the space asteromorphs return, and it's the next phase of their evolution with the two wing-like brains coming out of this head. And there's something like the stars exploding in the background. Okay, so there, I was on like hanging out with a group of people, and I was bored, took a blurry picture of the beer glass, beer bubbling up. I was like, wait a minute, I could use that. And then it became the universe exploding. Many, many pictures like this. I mean, in some cases, especially with the snake people, like the eye of the creature is actually the eye of a friend, or like sometimes now looking back at this as a married man, it's another level and another dimension of cringe. But like, there was a girl I was kind of like crushing on, and she had like this tattoo, and one of the creatures has a similar tattoo, and it was like, I mean, these are also among some of the reasons where I almost disowned All Tomorrows.
Yeah.
But, you know, fate, it seems, had other ideas.
I love that some of the imagery was scavenged from the environment around you. I mean, sometimes people have this image of an artist or a writer being, you know, cooped up in some remote study or some ivory tower and being, you know, separated from the world around. But you explore the city around you, and you look at the creatures around you, and you go into nature, and you use the textures and the imagery and the creatures that you interact with, and you bring that into your art. Well, to sort of segue into life in Ankara and Turkey, I believe you were born in Ankara, you moved to Istanbul as a child. And Istanbul and Turkey have such a fascinating, rich history. So I wonder how the history of your home country has informed your interests in imaginary history and in real history in your work.
Yeah. I mean, Turkey's history, nature, to a degree, politics, they all influenced me and invigorated me, you know. There's a very common line of thought, especially among, let's say, upper middle class Turkish people with a Western education, that they believe that the country and the region is kind of like not cool, you know. I mean, they would rather sit in a boring cafe in New York or London and just exist, you know, rather than interacting with their own country. And I'm not saying this in a nationalistic way, but I mean, there's a kind of Western cargo cult among educated in brackets, educated Turkish people, that they are, you have to go, işte Dean and DeLuca's New York, işte Pike Place, Rose, this, Seattle. I mean, okay, yeah, those exist, those are cool, but you know, you can be your own person also, and you can also be an exporter of information and just life rather than a net importer. So, I mean, that was a sentiment I always had in me. And also, like, for example, now looking back at it, and this only becomes apparent in hindsight, that a couple of years before I wrote or I started working on All Tomorrows, in Turkey, we went through a great earthquake in August 1999. And it was very sad. I lost my grandmother, and our family kind of fell on hard times. And now I look back, and I can identify that earthquake as the moment where I fully began to venture into science fiction, fantasy, obviously for escapist purposes. But I remember, like, very clearly once, this was the year, I think 2003 or something. So the earthquake was still very fresh in our memories. And I can also send you this photograph. I was painting one of the images for All Tomorrows, and me and my family, we were on a boat trip. And this is the kind of boat trip that takes place on wooden boats, and you stay for one night or a few on this boat, and the boat visits every bay and beautiful unreachable cove, and then you just have a nice time. I was painting this creature, it was one of the finger fishers, of course, because summer on the Turkish Mediterranean, I always go to these tide pools and catch these animals and find them, and I felt like, what if I could just eat these and live like that? And that was actually the psychological self-image of me foraging among tide pools as a reflection of the fingerfisher creature.
Lovely.
So I was painting this animal on this boat trip. Yeah, I was painting this animal on this boat trip when suddenly there was a huge swell on the sea. Sometimes it happens, I don't know why. And all of my family members, we looked at each other in dead silence because we feared it was another earthquake coming, and no one wanted to bring it up. So everyone was like, something happened, didn't it? Maybe it was a submarine or something like that. And it was one of the creepiest memories. I was really scared. But so I was feeding that fear into that creativity and, feeling more alive at the end. I'm thankful for it. And to come to other parts of being influenced I'm not speaking just for Turkey. I think the entire region is, of course, I am biased, but the entire region, you start from Romania, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece, Cyprus, North Cyprus, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Georgia, Armenia, all of those places. There's a sense of reality that I think has somewhat disappeared from Western countries. And usually this manifests as a chaos and, maybe you wouldn't really like to live there. Everyone likes things to be more predictable. But there is this kind of history is real and alive in those places, sometimes with bad results, I must add. But at least it gives life a sense of consequence that, I haven't experienced as directly when I was studying in the US or when I was working in Italy or when I was also studying in the UK. But of course, that could be, my biased information. At the end of the day, I think the entire world is beautiful and full of wonders when you know how to look at it. So there. But almost certainly, in Turkey, it's a common phrase that we have more Greek ruins than Greece and more Roman ruins than Italy. So being surrounded by these relics of these ancient civilizations, bygone eras, past cataclysms and catastrophes, and being able to literally walk out to the street and touch them,
Yeah.
I think that has kind of given my science fiction scenarios a bent towards that kind of setting, I must add.
Yeah, that's got to feed into that sense of time and of history and of future and past that's in so much of your work.
Yeah. So I think there's this, as I told before, to sum it up, geographical traumas and a wealth of history and nature. Funny, I was talking with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about he studied in Oxford too, and he was like, what would you like to do with the rest of your life? And I was like, if I had no other obligations, I would move to Eskişehir, which is a very small town in the middle of Anatolia. Just sit there. It's a university town, so they got good internet. Sit there and write. And my friend was like, why don't you think about New York or stuff? Man, in Eskişehir, I could jump into a car, drive 20 minutes, and reach this Phrygian cult valley full of buildings that look like molten cheese. They're so old, you don't know where the stone formation ends and where the rooms begin, And in New York, you can go to, I don't know, the Met, I guess. Yeah, but you can also go there as a tourist, if you net things up. That's my interpretation, of course, but we had this exchange and I still stand behind that line of thought to this very day.
Yeah, no, there's something strange about how like globalization has made so many people all over the world fetishize a very small and specific number of places and lifestyles and cultures. It doesn't make much sense to me because there is so much more to the world than a Starbucks on Manhattan. But you were speaking about like, exploring through wikis as almost a new kind of cultural form. And that speaks very much to me, and I suspect to a lot of people who watch Alt-Shift-X, that idea of immersing yourself in the lore of a world as almost a new kind of mythology. It reminds me of, like, I think Tolkien said of The Lord of the Rings that he was trying to write a folklore or a mythology for England. And I'm not sure how that worked out for him since, The Lord of the Rings is a property that's owned and commercially exploited by only a small handful of companies, when a mythology is something that is more shared, I think, and more collaborative. But that sense of mythology, I think, really is compelling to people in All Tomorrows. And there's something about it that makes people believe in it in a weird way. I read through the YouTube comments of the All Tomorrows video, and it was shocking how many people commented, "Is this real?" Which really struck me, that people, like, the video is presented as like sort of a faux real archaeological, history of the future. But it was so fascinating to me that people were like, is this meant to be real? People were arguing about the factuality of this stuff. And what's my question? My question is that I love how you have a lot of imaginative work. You have fantastical, weird ideas in your work, but you also have a really strong grounding in factual, evidence-based reality. A lot of people see those two things as in conflict or in contradiction of each other, but you allow speculation to exist alongside factual reality, and you use fiction and speculation to inspire factual research and investigation. So, how do you balance that in your head between, a love for fiction and new ideas, but also a commitment to evidence-based research?
Well, very, very good points. My favorite was the comment where this one kid told this All Tomorrow story to his little brother as like the real facts, and then shipped him off to school with that as a history lesson. I think it's the coolest big brother ever. But yeah, I mean, now a sense of mystery and scientific realism, they are like a couple that has been forcibly divorced, I think. But if you look at real life, so many reasons behind so many immediate things that affect our lives very strongly are unknown. I mean, if you look at the 9/11 era, like, why did the U.S. link September 11 attacks to their invasion of Iraq? Even closer to today, like COVID. Now people are talking about ideas that, maybe it was an accident by the Virus Research Institute in Wuhan. Or did it come from a bat? Or, oh, no, wait, was it a pangolin? Or, the question is, I'm not saying that, I'm not pushing conspiracy theories here. Nobody knows. That's the deal. Nobody knows. Conspiracy theorists just give another wrong answer. But for most immediate things, like, why did World War I start? Nobody knows. Nobody knows, and nobody ever will. And there's life, when you study science real enough, when you study history in a similar way, is full of these nobody knows areas. I mean, to be a good scientist is not to say that I know the answer. No, to be a good scientist is to be able to say confidently, oh, I don't know, there's a mystery here. And that's the fractal way science grows. Every answered question creates a few more unanswered questions. And then until we try to grasp at the very bedrock of existence, but it still keeps eluding our grasp. So a sense of mystery, far from being unscientific, it's exactly, I think, the reason science operates. In a way, though, I mean, of course, we must also be careful not to slip too much into conspiracy land. And also, like, conspiracy theories, they're always the worst sorts of theories. Like, they are not the... They are the results of... They are produced by people who think they know the answer. Whereas science, as we just discussed, is all about saying, oh, therein lies a mystery. So I must also add this side note, lest it sound like I'm a quack for conspiracy theories. But also, like, I mean, for stories like All Tomorrows, one of my biggest groundings is just, if you look at zoology, evolution, and life histories of almost practically any animal, like especially insects and mollusks, you get these bizarre stories that you only have to shift the main characters to people. In fact, I was talking about a similar story with my wife this day, and we could just, like, let's do it right now, man. And I'm going to tell you a story, and at the end, I'm going to tell you where the story comes from. Okay? So we open up on a moonlit plain. The ground is covered with wet moss, and suddenly it splits open, and a man comes out. You know, he looks like Jared Leto, but skinnier and kind of like gown looking. You know, if Jared Leto has been through like a wild month in some unspecified South Asian country, you know, it's exactly what he looks like. He crawls out of the ground. He looks at the hole he crawled out of, and he sees this kind of shed skin, exactly the shape of a human being. He's perplexed, but being Jared Leto, he's unfazed, and he walks through this bizarre landscape, okay, until he comes across another cocoon buried under wet, moist moss. And then he starts to like rip it aside, and out of this cocoon comes a like really bodacious lady that looks like Jennifer Connelly from A Requiem from a Dream. You're gonna see why I made this similarity, why I made this casting decision in a bit. So these two walk around and have these existential conversations only in the way these two actors and actresses can. And they're like, why are we here? Nobody knows. Where is everybody? Nobody's around. And then one day or one night, they arrive at this bizarre forest place where beneath the roots of the trees, the ground is like throbbing and pullulating. Like, so they kind of look at it. They kind of start digging at it. And out comes this hand. It's a baby's hand, but it's the size of Jared Leto's torso, you know? So they kind of uncover this giant baby. And it's not a baby, it's a huge creature. It's a beyond baby. It's a babyun. And babyun says, why do you disturb my slumber? And Jennifer Connelly asks, we want to know who we are, why we were put on this earth. And the baboon looks at them with like this disgusting look on his face. You came out, you're worthless. There's no more goodness in this world for you. Be gone. And they're like, well, why? What do you want us to do? You could try reproducing, but it won't work because only we breed in this world, says the baboon. And then you realize that the baboons kind of split like into little puppy versions of themselves into smaller baboons, but they all stay like little baboon, crawling baboon underground worms. And they never mature into fully grown people. By some freak coincidence, only Jennifer Connelly and Jared Leto have metamorphosed. They try to have kids of their own. They can't. So the film fades out with them making love in a hopeless but desperate way. Fade, end credits, titles play. Now this story, and you know why I cast Jennifer Connelly from Requiem of a Dream, this story is exactly the way a certain wood-boring insect reproduces. And this is actually very common in the northern United States and Canada. For the life of me, I cannot remember the scientific name, but it's a wood-boring pest. What they do is, for some reason, the maggots reproduce in the trees. They reproduce parthenogenetically. So like maggot gives birth to more maggots, and they're all clones of each other, and they just grow to a giant size. Now, when some freak heat wave happens, the maggots do metamorphose into adults. They try to reproduce. They have desperate insect sex, but nothing comes of it. And they die, they dry out. End of story, roll credits. So just by adopting the life cycle of any given invertebrate, dare I say, you could come up with some pretty strange world building and Lovecraftian stories of your own. And to go back to your previous point about lore and world building, I mean, my advice to aspiring writers, maybe learn a little HTML. I'm saying don't start a wiki, but you can also be really successful, but in 10 years, maybe the wiki gets deleted or something. Learn to do HTML and just do a little series of text websites with links to each other. And then you can write the wiki of your own universe. And I think people will look at it as an amazing story and will spend years and years reading it. That's also similar to another classic favorite of mine, the SCP universe.
Yeah, big fan.
I mean, it started out as a kind of fake wiki kind of website from one image only, and then grew exponentially from there. So, maybe future authors who are listening, they can take that advice and try to create worlds of their own that way.
Yeah, the SCP wiki is such a great example of that sort of like neo-mythology, this kind of new kind of lore that's being created. And like Slender Man is a sort of an example of like a modern cryptid, right? It's this imaginary creature that sort of exists ephemerally online. I'd like to hear about your book, Cryptozoologicon, because you wrote in collaboration with some others a book about cryptids, about, creatures that are speculated or claimed to exist that may or may not exist. And in this book, you imagined, okay, like let's take Bigfoot, let's take, the Loch Ness Monster. If they were real, what kind of creatures might they be? Realistically, what kinds of bodies, what kinds of evolutionary histories might they have? Could you speak on that project?
Oh, sure. I mean, Cryptozoologicon, I was in the brain team of that book with John Conway and Darren Naish. But due to other projects, actually, Darren Naish ended up writing most of Cryptozoologicon. Me and John Conway had nailed down some of the main subjects, like this cryptid is going to be that, and that cryptid is going to be this. And I had done a few illustrations, but I could not participate in that book as much as I wanted. But still, I guess I could count myself in the brain team of the book. And basically, it was like taking a similar approach, sort of a scientifically educated world building to this whole big creepypasta-like world of cryptids. And basically, we said, okay, let's assume that as a given, Imagine there's really a winged animal living in Jersey, and what would that be? So we went with it, and it was a good success. We planned to do a volume 2, but John, Darren, and I all had our own ideas, and so the volume 2 of Cryptozoologicon is a cryptid in itself, awaiting for the day to see the light of the day. Actually, a lot of paintings are ready for it. Nobody has gotten around to writing it yet. And I don't know, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Any decade now.
Sometimes creative projects have their own evolutionary history and their own branching paths and extinction events, I suppose. I
mean, Cryptozoologicon inspired a lot of people to come up with scientific explanations of their own. And, that's almost as great a success for me as seeing the volume 2 on shelves.
Yeah, it's like with your with the All Yesterdays book, that was followed up by a book called All Your Yesterdays, where you invited other people, just the general public, to submit their own artwork and imaginings and their own speculations on other kinds of dinosaur creatures, which was really cool. And I'd love to talk a little bit about one of the most striking things about All Yesterdays to me. I mean, the basic idea is that imagining what dinosaurs looked like is hard because we've just got fossils and bones and things. We don't know what musculature and what the fat and the skin and the feathers and the colors and the behavior. There's so much that we can't know for sure about dinosaurs. We can only make informed speculations. We're all familiar with images of dinosaurs as these scaly, grey, skinny, skeletal monsters, but those images might be wrong. And one of the devices you guys used to illustrate this problem is that you tried what you called shrink wrapping modern animals. Could you describe what it means to shrink wrap animals and why you do it?
All right. So a common problem we saw in many dinosaur reconstructions was that the artists basically just took the skeleton and just drove a slight edge over it and maybe some very basic muscles. Now, the creature looks like it's been starving. In fact, no animal looks like that. You know, they say, reptiles were scaly, so they didn't need it. No, I mean, even lizards and crocodiles, even snakes have like a big amount of chunk in their trunk. I mean, if you see x-rays of animals, you would know. So we tried to do the same approach with dinosaurs. We made our dinosaurs beefier and hairier and featherier. And then we did the inverse approach with skeletons of existing animals. So a horse looks like something like something out of the paintings of Bruegel or Hieronymus Bosch. And things like an elephant's trunk, they're all muscle, so they don't fossilize. So we said, maybe the future paleontologists reconstruct them with just a flap of skin or a big hole where the trunk should be. And we did I think 8 or 10 paint drawings like this. And they were all very well received. I mean, there was one with a hippopotamus, and the hippo's jaw is that terrible looking, like full of, it's like the skull of a dragon, like with spikes and horns everywhere. But when you see a hippo in the flesh, it's just a round boy. And of course, it's still very dangerous. I mean, hippos kill more people than many other animals. But still, I mean, we try to make the mistakes knowingly, and we even the writing was a bit hyperbolic. Like, there was a reconstruction of a cat, and like, we know that the killer predator cat had 5 switchblade claws on each limb, and it could easily overpower other animals like humans. And there was things. And like, we wrote things like the teeth of the hippo were strong enough to crush through the metal exoskeleton of the car, which, I mean, the effect being that the narrator did not know cars from living creatures. Maybe they imagined them as giant insects. Yeah. So slowly this work took shape, and, as I told earlier, it still pays part of our bills to this very day, and still I get questions every month about it from fans. So we must have done something right.
I think my favorite shrink-wrapped animal was the swan.
Oh, yeah.
Because, the skeleton of a swan, you wouldn't be able to see that it has all these feathers and plumage and stuff. So the illustration in All Yesterdays of the swan was very skinny, and its long sort of like wing bones had no feathers. They were just these long spiky protrusions, and they were illustrated as spearing fish with their long, sharp wing bones. Was the speculation that you guys made as what a swan might look like, which is just such an amazing illustration of, like, it just goes to show how little we know about dinosaurs and other animals that we only have the skeletons of. So yeah, that really speaks to that sense of the unknown that we were speaking about earlier. And the need for mythology to fill that vacuum. And I'd love to also speak about your surreal paintings. Anyone who hasn't seen CM Kösemen's paintings, there's a link in the show notes to go and see some of them, because there are these dreamlike and nightmarish paintings of demons and aliens and ghost-like creatures that are very difficult to describe, but there's something very sort of archaic and primal about some of these images, a sort of spiritual dimension to them. And sometimes when people look at these illustrations and look at, even on the All Tomorrow's video YouTube comments, there's all these people saying, wow, this guy must be on a lot of drugs. This guy must be taking lots of drugs. But I have read that, you don't do that. I'd like to know how you access that headspace. Like, how do you get into the emotional state where you can sort of channel these spiritual sorts of images and these fantastical images? How do you produce those?
Thank you so much. I mean, to disappoint some of your listeners, unfortunately, I don't binge on psychoactive chemicals. There have been a lot of people who thought otherwise. But unfortunately, the only drugs I use are knowledge and speculation. The paintings, they're actually really easy to do. I mean, okay, so let's say I spent like 1 month drawing aliens or creatures, and then for those drawings, I have to like measure muscles and like reconstruct skeletons properly. And it kind of gets a bit chafing after a point, I mean, like if you do any work long enough, you kind of get not bored but tired by it. So when I go into surreal painting mode, now the brush and paint, they're totally different instruments. They're harder to control, actually. And so a lot of the weirdness you see, they're actually my excuses for trying to control the paint and trying to make it look consistent. And, when I've been making carefully measured drawings, now I can just, in one gesture, block, bish, bash, bosh, throw out anything that I would like. And there, the only fight that I have is with myself, that if it looks nice for me, then it's okay. If it looks, if it satisfies me, I put it out, and a lot of people love it. So I'm really happy for that. I mean, with surreal paintings, one of my close friends and collectors also said it looks like cave art from another planet.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like with painting, it's really about colors and shapes. And especially towards the present day, I gravitate more and more away from depictions of creatures. And like one of these days, I'm just going to be happy making a surreal landscape or just blocks of colors. And maybe I'll move to non-figurative painting, who knows? But just making that mark in that shape at that time feels really satisfying. And I just, there's really no trade to it. I mean, other than just be honest to yourself. Don't try to make it look like anything, but just end up happy with the marks you have made on the paper or the cardboard or whatever it is that you're painting on.
One of your really interesting series, and I forget the name of it, but you were painting, instead of painting creatures or people, you were painting visual representations of ideas as though they were like a bacteria or these sorts of abstract shapes. What was that series called?
It's called The Memetic Fauna, after memes, and it's another one of my almost disowned projects. Basically, it was like, with me, the art comes before the concept, and it might surprise a lot of your listeners, but that is the case. So I found a way early in the 2000s to make these really cool paintings in a very short time. Just draw with ink, spray it with water so everything becomes smoky. Draw one more time with pencil so you get the hard bits. Scan it and invert it. So when you invert like black marks on white, it becomes like stars gaping out from a dark space, and you can then add color very easily. So in like 1 month or something, I could make hundreds of these. So, I was like, okay, there's this product what to do with it. I got to showcase it somehow, And I don't want to say, like, these are my creepy paintings. So I was also familiarizing with myself with Richard Dawkins' idea of the memes, and today memes mean like more funny screen caps or what, but memes are ideas that propagate from mind to mind. And I was like, yeah, what if we could give these memes a visual representation? I was inspired by a science fiction author, David Brin, and in his Uplift series, there's a kind of universe where memes are real, and it's really difficult. Like, in this universe, it's a bit like Warhammer's universe, where to hyperspace you go through hell, but in this universe, it's kind of like a postmodern literary studies kind of place where concepts have meanings, and if you deconstruct an idea, you could kill these meme monsters or whatever, those kinds of things. So I kind of appropriated that and worked on it to give meaning to those sketches, and there they were. And a lot of people really liked them. They were the subject of Kevin Schreck used them in his documentary Tangent Realms, and I was like, no, man, come on, no need to dig those out. But if they like it, who am I to object?
Yeah, the creator has no control over which of their creations speak to people, I suppose. But that's really interesting about that mimetic series, because it seems to me that your art, and I suppose all art, it's not something that comes pure and unfiltered and directly from the mind of the artist. Art comes through the process and through the materials and through the medium that it's transmitted through. And I saw on that documentary Tangent Realms, there was a sequence where you did a painting using not a paintbrush, but using leaves and branches and objects from the natural environment. And you even, your physical posture, you held yourself imagining that you were moving and holding these objects in the way that a dinosaur-like creature might hold it. And, I've noticed that you also have a fondness for making funny animal sounds and stuff. So it really strikes me that you have a sort of multi-sensorial approach. Like, you're a visual artist, but it's not just about the visuals. There's sound, there's physicality, there's textures. So I don't know, like, how do you view like this multi-sensorial approach? Like, how do your other senses and sound and touch affect the way that you create your art, your paintings and otherwise?
Well, I think sound, even though I like making funny sounds, I think it's, music sometimes really motivates me, but it motivates everyone, so there's nothing distinct about that. But while painting, sometimes posturing, and like usually when I paint big paintings, I lay the paper flat on the ground and just crawl around on it. I sometimes feel like I'm piloting a mecha. The painting is usually bigger than myself, so I could feel like I could like step into it and even become it, And then the kind of acting is kind of important, but I think the biggest input in my gas tank, so to speak, is the things I do and the people I am with when I'm not painting, You go somewhere, you just spend some time with your loved ones, conversations. You could easily imagine like just a very basic day. I'm just going to give an example from last week. My wife and I were on the road, and then we visited this ancient ruin, which is called Garga, which is in the middle of nowhere in Western Anatolia. And it looks like the builders of Stonehenge tried to build an ancient Greek temple. It looks very like huge megalithic blocks, but also in the shape of a Greek temple. Few other places on earth like that. And then in the evening, we had dinner, and then I took pictures of moths and flies coming at our porch light, because that's a cool activity. So now out of that whole day, you could come up with an idea of maybe giant moths coming out of a prehistoric temple, or because I spent a lot of the day driving, I get the idea of these like insect-like biomechanical cars or motorbikes, which I like sketching a lot. So our daily life influences a lot. I mean, when you have a bad day, I don't feel creative at all. I mean, I envy the kind of artist who says they are fed by tragedy. But usually it's when you're happiest, or when your belly is full, or you don't have to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow, then you're at your best self creatively. But that's just me, you know. I mean, there are some artists and writers and producers out there who genuinely are fed by personal tragedy, then all the more power to them.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting about, you know, ultimately what feeds art is the daily life of the artist, because, of course, what else would it be? But when someone goes to a gallery and they look at a painting, they don't see the artist, they see the brushstrokes. And so that's what they have to analyze. When they search for meaning, they look at the shades, the techniques, the patterns, the colors. They search for metaphors, and they search for analogies, and they search for some hidden meaning. But sometimes sometimes the imagery is generated by what the artist had on hand and what tools were available and what colors were available. And sometimes the tattoo of a cute girl who the artist had a crush in is where the imagery comes from. Sometimes it's the beer bottle that becomes the asteromorph apocalypse. And there's something funny about the meanings that we read into art that might not really be there. And that doesn't invalidate people's subjective opinions. But it's funny that disconnect is there, and maybe that disconnect needs to be there.
Yeah, I think
in order for us to read our meanings,
I think it's kind of like when you really, really zoom out, you know, some of that really does work out. I mean, but when you look at an artist's entire body of work and the time he or she lived in, and you know, then you can really see some parallels or indications, or at least trends. But I mean, if you look at a single painting and you say that this artist is painting this because it's like 3 years after his mother died or something, maybe not, you know. I mean, like my previous comment about science, you know, you can't really get very exact with those mysteries. I mean, in certain cases, for example, one of my favorite artists, my idol, is Mr. Wayne Douglas Barlow. He's the most awesome world-building project, Expedition. Anyway, so Wayne Barlow wrote Expedition. He started writing it when he was on his honeymoon. And it's a world full of alien animals, unpredictable, beautiful sunsets, like a kind of like, there's something even like slightly erotic about the way the creatures look. So 10, 20 years later, you look at that and you could say maybe it's about the joys of his marriage. But then Barlow went through a divorce. And then his work became about hell, actually, trying to picture inhabitants of hell, tormented souls, strange demons. So, I mean, I'm not reading anything into it, but maybe he went through a rough patch in his life. And then this kind of infernal world building became his venue of escape. But now he's been remarried, I think, and he, at least on Instagram, he looks very happy. And now his works about hell have taken up this kind of wholesome, more like grounded and extremely majestic, serene appearance. And now then you can say he's really happy. You know, this guy is having a golden age. Is it true for his personal life? We can never tell. And maybe, I mean, someone may make similar inferences about my personal life based on my works. But usually it's like looking at the world through a T-shirt that you can, I think the only haziest and the biggest pictures are true. And sometimes when it tells us more about the commenter than the artist himself or herself.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about Snaiad. Is that how you pronounce it? Mm-hmm. It's this...
Yes, Snaiad.
it's this incredible world building project where you have imagined all these different species and ecosystems and this history of this imaginary world in startling detail, with all these different species and how they work and how they operate. How did that project come about? What was the goal with Snaiad?
I was inspired for Snaiad by the works of Wayne Barlow, who we just discussed, and he is like the god of all speculative evolution people out there. He's like, really, all of us took our first lessons from Mr. Barlow. So if you're listening, I'm so indebted to you. I saw his book Expedition, and I was like, I could do something like that. And then I get to work. I just started drawing creatures, bish, bash, bosh, endlessly. I developed a technique in which I could basically colorize watercolors and pencils on computer. So in a relatively quick time, it looks like really nice, high quality. So I drew like nearly 200 such creatures and wrote stories for maybe 150, 160 of them. And I organized them into groups and clades. And then I wrote a history of the expedition of the planet. And then it was online, and it's the one work I haven't disowned. I really like Snaiad so much, in fact, that I'm doing a redux of Snaiad. So it's going to be it's going to be like one of those Evangelion films where the director wasn't happy with the first product and he started to do it all over again.
Director's cut.
Like, a complete reboot, actually. Complete reboot. I'm redrawing all animals, fixing some nagging details, adding a cartload of new clades and groups, coming up with a new illustrated technique to draw all of them. And I'm really hoping to finish it by the end of this decade. It's going to come out as a book right before or right after the All Tomorrows reboot, which I now have to do thanks to your retelling. People are asking about it so much.
I'm glad to have motivated that.
Yeah. So Snaiad was just, my attempt to invent an ecology, and basically the trick of that game was like to draw convincing aliens. You shouldn't be very alien, but it should be kind of like they should all be descended from a common body plan. And then it's a game of how and to which distance I could stretch that body plan and make derivations and evolutionary offshoots from that. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. And it still keeps I still do something related to Snaiad almost every single day. New drawings, new digitization attempts, and hopefully we'll get there. Hopefully it will be ready in time. And if you follow me on Patreon, you could see sneak peeks from the upcoming Snaiad book. Awesome. And that project kind of formed my ideas about if you travel to another world, would we see really aliens, would everything have 5 eyes and 10 limbs and be made out of crystal? Or maybe if it was an Earth-like planet, you would see something scurry about. From a distance, it would look like a lizard. Once you get close to it, it has a completely different anatomy that has forged itself to that very similar shape. But its inner workings are completely different because it comes from a different ecology. And it kind of gave me that insight on the evolution of life. One of my favorite discoveries during the research for Snaiad was, so there are these things called sun spiders. They're yellow. They live in the Middle East and Central Asia. They're very fast and they basically murder everything with their jaws. Now, the profile of a sun spider jaw is almost exactly the same shape as a leopard's skull. It's amazing. Obviously, they are not related at all, completely different lineages. But they've arrived at the same mechanical solution. Similar with fish and squids. Fish are fish and squids are jet-propelled mollusks that have a streamlined fish-like shape. Even their directions are different. But when you look at them from afar, the silhouette is the same. It's a kind of teardrop-shaped hydrodynamic water creature. So working on Snaiad has given me that insight that wherever we go, we will see, like, at least wherever we go with Earth-like environments, we will see Earth-like-ish silhouettes. But of course, their evolutionary relationships will be completely different.
Yeah, and yet there is like that very clear relationship and that genealogy between those creatures, which is so missing and so absent from other popular representations of imaginary creatures, right? Like you look at in movies and things, monsters and creatures seem to exist in a vacuum. That there's very clearly very little thought put into how these creatures work. I wish that these shows or movies, I wish Hollywood would hire you to be an advisor and a concept artist to tell to tell these directors and these creators that, you know, some of the things that they could do that could make these creatures feel so much more real, and these, you know, worlds feel so much more real. I wonder, like, you know, one of the other very common YouTube comments on the All Tomorrows video was people saying, you know, I want to see this as a TV show. I want to see this as a video game. I want to see this as an animation. If Netflix, you know, came up and gave you a briefcase full of millions of dollars and gave you an unlimited budget, you know, would you want to adapt a story or adapt a world like Snaiad into a show or into an animation? Like what would you do if you had the means to create some kind of project like that, if any?
Well, I mean, that's my ultimate ambition. I mean, I live and sleep with dreams of something like that happening. I mean, if given unlimited budget, I could maybe start with actually All Tomorrow, since now it's so popular. I would kind of rework its story a bit, like chip away at its rough edges. But then the medium of expression would be 2D animation, not even 3D animation, 2D animation. Yeah. I would get in touch with, since this is a pure fantasy now, I would get in touch with Studio Ghibli. I think nobody else can do it like they do. And also with animated or like film-based adaptations, music really matters. So I would maybe use a lot of old composers, Prokofiev, Wagner, Stravinsky, a lot of the Austrian composers. So there, I mean, that would be my dream, of course. I don't know how I would do a story, like a proper like narrative with characters and stuff. I mean, I think something like All Tomorrows is too big for one character's story to go through. Yeah. I mean, have it with like narrator, maybe narrated by Morgan Freeman or David Attenborough, and animated by Studio Ghibli, and with a soundtrack by, you know, John Williams or Hans Zimmer. Now we're at it. That would be my ultimate ambition.
If Netflix is listening, just we'll take the cash anytime. We want to make this happen, right?
Yeah. And I'll hire you as my production manager, so we'll split some of the cash in.
50-50, right?
Honestly, like the exposure you gave to All Tomorrows, it feels like the beginning of the new chapter in my creative life. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so glad to have brought it to more people, because I think it's amazing work, and there's so many people who are excited to discover it. So I'm really happy to be a part of that. Have you seen Oats Studios, which is a project by Neil Blomkamp?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it. I haven't seen it, to be honest. Neil Blomkamp is a cool director.
Yeah, like District 9 and stuff. And Oat Studios is this YouTube channel where there are these very like high budget CGI science fiction horror projects, and they're sort of just like pitches or like trailers or just sort of like short little features that are just sort of like a concept for a movie. And it feels kind of reminiscent to me of some of your work in some ways. I'm
honored. I'll definitely give it a look.
What are some of your other favorite fictional worlds. Like we mentioned, like the fun of reading through, Warhammer and SCP wikis and things. Like what are some of your favorite worlds or worlds with creatures to read about or to watch?
Well, among my favorites, I mean, one of my favorite authors, as I just told you a couple of times, is Olaf Stapledon. I think like all of his work is really unique. I mean, he came out in interwar Britain and boom, 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 just made these books and then suddenly disappeared. He was a real genius. And his world, I can really see myself existing in. Funnily enough, like before the Disney reboot, I was a huge fan of the Star Wars universe, especially with those books. And in the early 90s, there were these websites like full of little worlds and animals and characters that these extended universe books were describing. And to me, Star Wars was like not as much about the Jedi or the galactic conflict, but it was about this weird place. You could go into any cafe or bar around the corner, and it would be full of these like four-eyed jumping spider man or like strange robots, and that felt like there was no end to weirdness in that universe. Now, of course, after Disney bought it, they steered the universe to another direction. But what can you do? I was a really huge fan of Star Wars until the 2015 or whatever. And then
I think I heard you say that you reading the Star Wars Extended Universe books helped you learn English when you were a kid.
That's part of the deal. Yeah. I mean, Star Wars Extended Universe, biology textbooks, zoology textbooks, books like I was a big reader of Pete Toombs, who has this books, Mondo Macabro, books about strange cinema from non-Western parts of the world, basically. And I was like, and this was my luck that my grandfather and my parents were always buying me these animal books. And of course, living in Turkey, there are a few quality animal books. So you have to learn the language to read them. So I did, and I read, and here I am. I mean, it was a big, it changed my life. That interest. Even today, I make part of my daily income from English language advising to advertising and PR companies in Turkey. So still not out of the woods yet. What else? Other universes. I really like Jack L. Chalker's. I probably butchered the name with my accent, but Whale World series. Do you know about this?
Whale World?
Whale World, like WELL, as in water well, not in like everything's well.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it.
Whale World is this artificial planet the size of Jupiter, but the gravity is lower for some reason. And it's divided into thousands of hexagonal subworlds. And every facet contains a different life form. The southern part of Wild World is full of like methane creatures, ice creatures, metallic creatures, silicone creatures. Northern part is full of these like jellyfish animals, werewolf creatures, whatever. Like it's really like a wild ride. I really recommend Jack L. Chalker's Wild World series to everyone. And then Larry Niven's Ringworld was a big inspiration too. Ringworld is basically this enormous halo-like artificial structure. It's got like a billion times the surface area of Earth, but it's all inhabited by people, but people themselves have evolved into different species. There's like predatory people, vampire people, like desert people or something like this. It was a huge eye-opener for me. I really liked it. I read some of Lovecraft's works, but didn't really inspire me that much. I mean, I loved In the Mountains of Madness and the Dream Quest of Cthulhu series. I think those two really stand apart. But other than that, I wasn't really huge on Lovecraft. Who else? Arthur C. Clarke, Childhood's End. Proof. That book. Man, that book.
Yeah.
It's like, even now I could pull it from my shelf. It's this book that you have to go back every 2 years, and it gives you a whole new like perspective every time you reread it.
Yeah, and it's so much about that sense of evolution and that sort of epoch changing, almost apocalyptic changes, and the interaction of these sort of godlike alien species. It's I can see the similarities between Childhood's End and some of your work, like All Tomorrows.
Yeah. So that was basically, I mean, part of my fuel tank, let's say.
Awesome. Maybe as a last question, when you were looking for something new, when you want to see some art, or if you're looking for inspiration, do you go to the gallery? Do you go to the library? Are there websites online? Are there YouTube channels? Is there, what kind of places do you go when you're looking for something new?
I think, especially these days, inspiration comes to me from like memoir books, actually, written by like perfectly ordinary people. There is a sense of like discovering new worlds when you read a good memoir. And it could be a memoir of an American artist in Paris in the 1920s, or an Austrian Jew growing up just before the First World War. Or like there's a lot of weird like Turkish memoirs too, like something as like mundane as the life and times of a medical company director in Istanbul. Like makes for some like surprisingly good reading. Like there's this thing where they're establishing the first aspirin factory in Istanbul, and they have to keep the tanks sterile for a whole day or something, or the aspirin doesn't take hold, whatever. So they try it once, it fails. Like twice, three times it fails, because they have to find a reliable supply of electricity, because back in those days, wasn't really smooth sailing with power sources. So what the director of the company does is, I think like 2 days before they have to deliver the product, he runs an illegal power line to a nearby military base in Turkey in the 1960s. And, you know, you wouldn't want to mess with the Turkish army in the 1960s because they're like no joke people. But then the commander discovers him, like, "Halt, who goes there?" And he was like, "Commander, you could shoot me now and I'd be happier. Believe me, I just have to get these aspirin cultures going." So actually the commander's like, "All right, man, anything for the good of the country or whatever." So he helps him and they brew the aspirin finally, whatever. So these like adventures like this, you know, there's countless adventures like this. Like if you're writing science fiction, if you're writing fiction of any kind, you can't beat reality. So you have to, like, at least for me in this current day and age, like reading about real things gives me a really good insight for new ideas. Like we made the same experiment with Jared Leto and Jennifer Connelly's Underground Bug Baby-Yoon movie, didn't we? Like you could write it that easily. If you take something from reality, twist, shape, mold, and adapt it, then you get fiction.
Yeah, and ultimately that's what it all comes back to. The conclusion of All Tomorrows was about how, as much as we can imagine and speculate about future empires and apocalypses and civilizations, it all comes back to the daily lives of ordinary people, and that's where the inspiration and that's where the meaning really comes from. So that's a lovely way to tie it all together, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, man.
No, thank you. It's I'm really glad you were nice enough to come and have a chat. I'm really inspired by your work and your attitude to creating and imagining and investigating and researching. So I'm looking forward to what comes out next, and I encourage everyone to go and check out C.M. Kösemen's website, linked in the description. Go and check out his Patreon, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Do check out Kösemen's work in the link below, and check out our sponsors CuriosityStream and Nebula. CuriosityStream has thousands of documentaries, including ones about dinosaurs and evolution. And Nebula is a video site with exclusive content from YouTubers like Wendover, Real Engineering, and AltShiftX. Nebula is an independent platform where we don't have to deal with YouTube's bullshit, and we can try different kinds of content. You can get Nebula and CuriosityStream for a year for just $15 at the link below. Thanks.